Similar sleeping hole on the Thai docks. The opening comes up just above my knee and is warm, exhaling the dark, yeasty manure smell of the unwashed human body. In 2015, when I connect with Tung Lin for the first time, NGOs estimate 17 to 60% of Thai shrimp includes slave labor, like Tung Lin in its supply chain. 17 to 60% might sound like a wildly high error range, but nobody knows anything in this world. It's divided between those who know nothing and are desperately trying to find out more, and those who know nothing and are financially incentivized to maintain that state. Once imprisoned on his boat, Tung Lin estimates he sleeps less than 5 hours a night. While other Thai fishers I speak with will report being given amphetamines to keep up with the pace, Tung Lin is not given any drugs. The captain provides his crew with instant coffee to eat by the scoop, because there's always fish to catch, nets to mend, a deck to clean. Tung Lin operates the mechanical winch that pulls the swollen trawl net out of the sea, a gargantuan teardrop of dying fish. After guiding it in and dropping it on the deck, his job is to sort the mass. He tosses the large, intact fish to other men who take them for freezing. The smallest fish, of which there are the most these days, the waters exhausted by the trawls, are unsaleable for grocery buyers. Instead, on many boats, these get placed in a series of blue barrels, collected along with ripped fins, mashed tails, crushed mollusks, and other organic debris to be sold for fish meal. Fishers like Tung Lin never see these small, unsaleable fish make it to port. They are passed to a sister boat at a rendezvous, traded along with food, cigarettes, Thai baht, and fuel. This is called transshipment at sea. It saves fuel for the larger refrigerated fishing vessels and allows some boats to stay out almost indefinitely. Resupplied by others, they turn into floating prisons for trafficked workers. The sister boat, the first aggregator among many, will chug off with the catch. From there, the trash fish will get bought by a broker, combined further with others from similar ships, until all are unloaded at a small private dock, tossed barrel by barrel onto long ramps with rollers that guide them from the water towards a fish meal factory. There, finally on land, they will be dumped into a giant pile in the hot sun. Within a day, a man with a rake and wearing dark rubber boots will push this pile of fish and fish pieces towards a growling mouth in the cement dock. It looks like a hole in the ground with two grinders on it for teeth, and it takes the rotting fish and pulverizes them further. The scent near the hole is deafening. It blocks out other senses. You close your eyes near this smell. You say, "Excuse me, I cannot hear you," or even think very well to your translator. It is the smell of thousands of tiny rotting fish piled ankle-high in the 90-degree Thai sun on a space that has held ankle-high levels of tiny rotting fish for years. It is a hot smell, not just from the climate and the decomposition, but because there are furnaces just beyond. You can see them glowing behind the man with the rake. The pulverized fish will pass on a conveyor belt toward those furnaces, getting cooked into a paste, then baked into meal. This will then be sold to yet another broker, bought by a feed mill, and blended with inputs from dozens of other facilities, all to create the protein base in pet food, food for fish farms, and feed for hungry little shrimp. Thus is the beginning of the Thai shrimp industry, a billion-dollar complex of activity that pumps 350,000 metric tons of shrimp into the world market each year, just under 10% of the total global supply. It is, depending on when I look during the writing of this book, the second or fifth largest producer after China, and always a top supplier to the United States, which buys more than 50% of its product each year. Shrimp are the single most popular, profitable, and widely consumed seafood in America, more ubiquitous than wedding salmon, tuna for carton sushi, or New England cod. And Thailand is our most sophisticated, developed, and integrated trading partner, largely the result of giant foreign investment developing its aquaculture sector. Once there is fish meal, actual shrimp production can begin. In aquaculture, with the easy ability to transport millions of tiny developing larvae from place to place, this is an oddly disjointed process, completely unlike a farm where animals are raised in a single place before being taken elsewhere for slaughter. Shrimp are raised everywhere, shipped to new, more specialized facilities at each stage, combined with others, then separated back out. The concept of traceability barely makes sense. The first step is the larval stage, and it occurs in a large, humid, warehouse-like space. The one I visit is filled with what look like plain cement sarcophagi, about 40 to a room. Approaching and leaning over the sarcophagi, you find thick troughs of nutrient broth, the color of cola, roiling away with oxygen bubbles. This is a broodstock facility. The air inside is held to a steady, sweaty 88 degrees. If you pull up a sample from these larval pools on day one, it's sea monkeys, motes floating in water, about 500,000 per tank. By day 4, these motes will look just slightly alive, like gnats flicking around in Brownian motion visualized. The cola color has faded slightly, and when extracted to a glass beaker for presentation, I think, Harry's champagne. My guide here, an American aquaculture entrepreneur, is leading a tour of businessmen looking to bring shrimp production to their home countries. When a Burmese worker walks in and begins flicking food into the troughs, the entrepreneur incorporates it into his tour seamlessly. Workers don't get a salary, he explains. They get a bonus based on the survivability of the tanks they manage. The owner of the facility, our guide's friend, chimes in, explaining the details. Rule number 1 when hiring people is you do not hire locals. They will want to go home. They will have families. You want someone who will live here 24 hours a day. If they come from a place at least 12 hours away, the chances of them going home is way down. The businessmen scribble notes. These are farmers. They don't work 8-hour shifts. They don't leave the farm. You must think of them that way. If you hire 3 people to work 3 shifts on a 24-hour day, all of a sudden you're paying $600, not $200. And that is a cost you can't maintain. Footnote. That's $200 and $600 US per month as reference. End footnote. Then it's back to our lecture on shrimp. As they grow, the larvae are moved to successively larger tanks to accommodate their size. By day 25, they look like black seeds, maybe the size of rye grains. And at this point, if you squint very closely, you can tell each grain of rye is attached to a tiny translucent tail about the size of a fingernail clipping. To harvest them, workers use fine mesh nets, swooping in to collect the seeds, draining them like pasta, and then flicking the remainder into a sloshing plastic bag of broth. This bag is then inflated with enough oxygen for shipping, tied off, and packed in a crate. All this happens by hand, totally efficient and low-tech, with workers squatting on an open-air dirt floor, whipping the bags around, pushing them in tight, flies buzzing. To get the count, workers tally each net by hand. I watched 2 Burmese girls, cheeks stroked with Thanaka, doing this at speed, ladling the larvae up, squatting, and counting those little black dots before tossing them into bags, again and again until the harvest is complete. Behind them, a buyer leans against his pickup truck, chatting lazily with the owner. Behind them both, a young woman sits at a microscope on a fold-out plastic table. Quality control, brought along at the request of the buyer's buyer, 3 notches upstream. And while the Burmese squat and count, and the buyer schmoozes, this woman slices open random bags. At each, she uses a pair of tweezers to prepare a slide, dabbing down the alcohol, smearing the slide cover on top, and cranking the microscope in. There, she jots down notes on color, gut-to-muscle ratio, and size distribution, while a few dogs lie in the dirt beside her. Everything and everyone baking in the heat. From here, the black dots head to a hatchery. They are officially no longer larvae, but post-larval shrimp, or PLs for short. As we drive across the Thai countryside, following that pickup, we pass a wreckage of dark lagoons. Long stretches of highway lined at both sides by perfectly square ponds, all a murky, stagnant green. We stare out the window at them, all knowing just a little bit about the shrimp industry. One of the businessmen asks, "So, is that the water for the hatcheries?" The American guide laughs. No. The water for the hatcheries must be clean. That is wastewater. Miles upon miles of it, gridded out across the landscape like Iowa corn. That's left over from someone who didn't know how to run their pond right, our guide adds. It used to be so simple. You'd throw some food in, and the shrimp would grow. Now you have to learn to do it right. At the farm, the shrimp are dumped into a pond in a tumbling black rush. Food goes in next, delivered now by men in a canoe, and finally, a foam aerator is placed on top, beating the water like miniature paddle wheels on a ferry boat. The shrimp continue to expand reliably, gobbling up the fish meal delivered 5 times daily, excreting lagoons of black shit below. They'll make their home here for the next 3 months. The limit in yield is purely space. Ponds are packed dense with shrimp, up to 90 per square meter. And in the smaller ones, if you miss time or overstock, there are stories of the ripened shrimp rising right out of the water as they grow, like dark popcorn kernels bursting over the pot edge. When they are finally whisked out in large nets at harvest, dipped in a succession of freshwater tanks for cleaning, the long and translucently blue-brown shrimp we know from the nature show emerge. Part whiskered alien, part beady-eyed friend, wriggling 1,000 to a bushel, each armored in its own hazel shell, curling inward like a beckoning finger. These are killed instantly. The same style of plastic barrels used to transport trash fish at sea are filled now with an ice slurry and packed full of the harvest. The temperature shock provokes an immediate and final spasm to each shrimp heart. A cap comes down, sealing them in darkness, and barrel by barrel they get jammed in the back of a truck for processing. From here, the clock starts ticking. There are 10 hours to get the shrimp from the farm into a bag, and then get that bag frozen to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit for export. If it's all done in smooth succession, the shrimp can sit in a deep freeze locker for just over 6 months, finally assuming the status of commodity, ready to be traded around the globe at the whims of the market. If there are hiccups, it all crumbles. Each hour of delay translates into weeks, even months of lost shelf life. A bounty crop responsible for an entire farming community's income can be rendered worthless from a slight glitch. To hedge against this, the harvest is conducted by yet another broker, a woman who temporarily buys each farmer's product, aggregates them with others in the region, and then transports the whole load cross-country to the industrial regions where shrimp is processed for sale. The broker evens out kinks in supply, perhaps selling the bulk of her product to a single plant, and then spreading the remainder across several competitors who are looking to top off. Her first stop is a pre-processing plant. Pre-processors are smaller operations, responsible for peeling and beheading. They're often located in temporary sites, hence the local term, peeling sheds, and range from the truly underground and illicit, dank, fishy spaces where whole families of migrants live on site and are paid per kilo of shrimp they peel, to meticulous industrial spaces proudly shown on the Western Annual Report.
How's it
Peeling
making
shrimp
it?
is delicate labor.
Really amazing,
Despite all
actually.
advances in technology,
That's a really
nothing
pretty
yet
thing.
can do the work better
What?
than small
It's a really pretty dog.
footnotes.
No, it's not.
Yeah, it is.
That is the ugliest thing I've ever seen. You want to see the other ones?
You should have seen this dog at Scouts. That was alright. I like that one.
They got fun.
Have you done this all day?
Mm-hmm.
Good job.
This
on
one's
the
old.
project. That one is really cute.
You like that one?
Yeah. With Stuffy.
Mm-hmm.
Hi.
Oh boy,
What?
you're painting.
Do you love it?
It's very dark.
Well, look at the picture.
I know.
I get what
Gnawing
I
at
get.
somebody's hand.
I think it's a stuffy.
In your picture, it looks like a hand.
It does look like a hand.
Alright, I was just saying hi.
I love you.
Love you. Oh, you doing a time lapse?
Dad said that he will manage my YouTube as my helper. How about this? Can you tell me your favorite social media?
TikTok.
Will you run my TikTok? If I send you videos and pictures, will you put them on TikTok?
I'll try to accustom to the trends, but I'll try. Maybe we'll see.
Then-
You've seen my TikTok.
Well, if you really get going on my TikTok for me and with my content, and I'll give you a percentage of my sales that you sell on TikTok. How's that?
Okay. That's if they go viral. But okay.
I don't need viral. I can't handle viral.
No, that's the only time anybody ever buys stuff is if it's a whole bunch of people looking at it.
I don't think so, because yesterday, Judy Crawford posted a video of her son opening my painting, and I got this sale from it. She contacted me from that and was like, will you do one for me?
How many people saw Judy Crawford's post?
Maybe like 50
There you go.
tops.
Well, alright.
Goodbye.
Love you.
I love you.
This multi-channel system exists to meet foreign demand. A supply chain expert explains, the smaller sheds smooth out risk for the entire system. Suppliers who can't commit to regular volume do not get deals with major grocery buyers, and so they turn to the smaller sheds to supplement. When I speak to a Burmese man who worked in one of these sheds, he describes hygiene standards as non-existent, the smell terrible, and the work variable depending on demand. One day 6 hours of peeling, the next day 10. And yet, the supply chain expert is right. The spaces are empirically critical supports. In one of the few investigated cases, the product from a single illegal peeling shed was found to have made its way to 4 other, more regulated pre-processing plants and 40 U.S. brands. End footnote. The product from these facilities will be bought by even larger processors above them, those with the giant factories that sell directly to exporters. These facilities operate above ground and above board, registering with industry associations and inspected frequently by teams of auditors. The space I visit is operated by one of the largest seafood processors in the world, a company that buys directly and exclusively from brokers, processors, and ponds that operate under its specifications. It is a model of vertical integration borrowed from the American poultry industry and allows for far greater oversight and control. However, even here, where explicit exceptions are never made, I'm told implicit ones do. If an upstream buyer, e.g. your grocery store, is in need, say the holidays have come and people need their shrimp, there is no hesitation to apply pressure on brokers to increase their supply. That broker must go out and execute, augment, find products somewhere to appease the mouths beyond. The final high-risk room of the factory is the cleanest space I've ever been. Shrimp from all the previous phases of production pass through it, as if collecting a blessing before getting bagged for export. To get there, we walk down a series of highly chlorinated cement steps to a basement, and then push through glowing yellow plastic curtains into a dressing area. Here, we disinfect, leaving our earthly bodies behind. We strip down, removing exterior layers. We wash our hands and forearms up to the elbows. We dab antibacterial gel on our faces. We slide on blue gummy rubber boots, then apply a face mask, a hairnet, a beard protector, then on top of all those, a beekeeper-like headpiece with veil. Finally, I'm helped into a gauzy smock and gown. Every inch of my body feels contained. We leave, not via door, but by wading through a crystal-clear, ankle-deep pool to disinfect our boots. The solution remains as perfectly transparent and wavy after we move through as before we entered. On the other side, we head through a sealed door to the line. Walking out, I can see the formerly low-risk shrimp pour into this room through another mechanized hole in the wall. The main line itself is maybe 100 yards long. Today, the workers are preparing shrimp for sushi, some slicing them further, others removing them from steel frames designed to straighten out their natural curl into something more aesthetic. I focus on one woman among the hundreds. She spins and slices a shrimp every 2 to 3 seconds, fingers twirling, head down, a living cog in my diet. Behind her, in a separate process, pink, pre-cooked frozen shrimp are being produced by the ton. They spill out of a kettle hot and steaming before being channeled into a long freezer. I'm told the freezing takes 13 minutes, but of course, the continuous input and output make the whole thing look instantaneous. Thousands of shrimp pouring in one side hot and pink, thousands of shrimp bouncing out the other, now frozen white, plinking down the chute into a succession of plastic bags that shudder past with the automatic rhythm of the factory. They are bags familiar to every frozen aisle of grocery stores across America, complete in every way except one, brand name and logo, afterthoughts to be applied later, just before they are bought, torn open, and dumped into a cook pot for dinner. Huddling and bundling. To fully understand the bottom of the commodity chain, it is helpful to take a step back and look at the concept of commodity as a whole. Whether wheat, iron, almond, or swine, commodities are rooted in fungibility, in an inherent similarity that allows them to be swapped interchangeably without thought or trade-off. The word comes to us etymologically from the French commodité, meaning convenience, and like many conveniences, it stems from simplifying the word. For each good, a series of details is selected, and once chosen comes to define the whole. An apple for juicing is no longer simply an apple, but a discrete series of appley details, from the pH of its flesh to the amount of wax on its skin. A bucket of trash fish becomes protein content alone. The details that are excluded, perhaps the place of origin of that apple, or the precise species of fish in the bucket, quite intentionally vanish. In this way, commodity is an agreement around nuance, a willingness to fix the depth of our scrutiny, and without it, in some form, trade would grind to a halt, fixated on endless, diminishingly small differences. With it, we receive the blessings of uniformity, purchasing at scale, stability through advanced buying, industrial engineering predicated on regularity, the comfort of consistency. The trade-off is one we accept almost unconsciously. After all, as the cliche goes, out of sight, out of mind. But this process has effects. At each step in the chain, through the maze of brokers, agents, and other aggregators who swap goods on our behalf, our visibility grows thinner. The branches of supply transition from manicured arrows on a corporate flowchart into a gnarled thicket on the ground. And rather than fight to see in those spaces, we hire professionals to gloss them over with their professional imaginations, replacing the abstraction of commodity with the colorful inventions of marketing. Suddenly, 100 scattered groundwater reservoirs become a single magical Poland spring. And since we largely accept this trade-off reflexively, or allow others to make this trade-off in our name, it is worth considering how the simplifications of commodity, its selective abstraction and filtering of a reality, change not only how goods are bought and sold, but also how they're created to begin with. The simplification of the eye stalk. The story behind seafood in this country is almost entirely hidden, Katrina Nakamura, an expert on Thai seafood and ethical supply chains, tells me. If you pick a regular everyday seafood product you grew up with, like a can of tuna or bag of frozen shrimp, it looks the same as when you were a kid, or when your parents were kids. But the way it is produced as commodity is completely different. Shrimp were, until very recently, a luxury good, as far from commodity as you can get. This is easy to forget in our current era, where runty gray knuckles of the stuff get tossed into everything from $5 lo mein to plastic-domed airport salads. But just 30 years ago, fresh shrimp epitomized class. They cost more than steak, were served at country clubs on silver, and existed as the defining hors d'oeuvre of the Upper East Side. Elite, elegant, expensive. These shrimp were not grown, but caught, trawled for with nets that swept the middle of the water column. Less bulldozer, more butterfly net. Kinder to the ecosystem than the benthic trawl, but still indiscriminate, inefficient gobblers, ensnaring 5 pounds of unwanted bycatch for every 1 pound of saleable shrimp, and widely hated for killing sea turtles. The boats were also expensive to operate, relying on domestic labor from the Gulf of Mexico, and only out seasonally, two qualities that limited the shrimp supply further, boosting its status as luxury. Aquaculture represented the promise of technology to liberate this luxury and make it available to the common man. And in many ways, the promise has paid off. Since 1980, prices have fallen, while production has increased some 3,000%. Shrimp farmers like to point out that some form of aquaculture has been practiced in Southeast Asia for millennia. And certainly this is true. Historically, coastal communities seized on and enhanced tide pools and inlets to create protected ponds for shrimp to grow. The best of these would be washed out naturally, existing as little more than sculpted features of the landscape. And in its early days, industry merely attempted to scale these practices, i.e., maxing out densities, applying consistent management techniques, sharpening the quality of food, and when in doubt, lining everything in plastic. But there was a problem. When shrimp lived in these more confined habitats, their sexual development was stunted by stress. The females simply refused to develop ovaries, which meant humans still had to head to the wild to scoop up natural broodstock. This is a little like farming if farmers first had to scour the forest for crops and then take them back home to replant. It was neither more efficient than trawling for mature shrimp, nor able to guarantee the large quantities needed by the global market to lower price. The single great breakthrough came in a fittingly bizarre and brutal manner. Then, as now, those trying to make aquaculture work raised their shrimp in overcrowded tubs. And as their shrimp swam round and round in circles in these tubs, their outside eye would rub against the side of the tank. And slowly, after God knows how many circles, in God knows what type of crowded environment, the outermost eyeball of the outermost shrimp in these tubs would eventually get rubbed right off, erased by friction. And from this misery, an industry was born. It turns out, for as of yet biologically unexplained reasons, a female shrimp who loses a single eyeball gets fast-tracked through puberty, her ocular loss unleashing a cascade of hormones that begets ovaries in as little as 3 days. This was not predictable, nor does it fit with some grand anatomical theory of shrimp endocrinology, but it is very real, and some supremely attentive farmer noticed it and began snipping eyeballs off by hand in an attempt to replicate it. Soon, the process was studied and verified in the lab, and although nobody could quite explain eye stalk ablation, the quirky stride of science skipped merrily forward, pushing shrimp aquaculture into a new age. Now, instead of relying on natural habitats for broodstock, farmers could breed them indoors. Trawling through estuaries was out. Genetic selection was in. After a decade of highly controlled domestication, shrimp with abnormally large and fleshy tails, fast growth rates, and tolerance for odd diets and turbid water were genetically selected and emerging. The result was nothing short of an economic fairy tale. A once humble farmer could eschew his family's rice paddy, wall off a pond, lower a plastic laundry basket in, and come up with a basket of gold. Or at least a basket of pink gold, which is what the tumbling heaps of flesh came to be known as. A boom ensued. Ponds were dug, mangroves raised, seawalls torn down to allow the salt water to flood in. It was all too easy and too lucrative for the market to ignore. This new shrimp was 4 times more profitable than rice farming. And like any other rush, from gold to diamonds to land, the years that followed were a sordid thing. For this was one of those fairy tales with an ugly moral waiting at the end. First, there was the fuzzy math of ecology. You would think, gee, if we can produce them in farms, then we no longer have to fish as much. Stephen Webster of the Monterey Bay Aquarium tells a PBS camera crew in Empty Oceans, Empty Nets. In fact, the opposite is true. Regardless of where shrimp are raised, they are still carnivorous, and thus, rather than silencing the trawls, the bloom of aquaculture encouraged them to take an even larger catch. It takes 2 pounds of wild-caught fish to create 1 pound of shrimp. And with aquaculture increasing the total supply of shrimp 5 times from the late 1970s, it forced the fish trawls to operate at 10 times capacity. Daniel Murphy, an expert on Thai seafood supply chains, explains the ripple effects. There were never, and there still are no, exclusively trash fish boats. They are a byproduct of boats willing to do market with a lower level trade, and they exist because there is money there. To wrangle the trash fish arriving in uneven amounts from tens of thousands of unaligned boats, the industry relied on brokers, who in turn relied on sub-brokers traveling port to port. These brokers and sub-brokers blended product from different boats, each finding their edge by upgrading a substandard catch, or merging bad actors and honest fishermen alike. Footnote. I'm sure the more observant can already see the horrid ecological sidebar here. As the boats began receiving regular payments for their trash fish, they trawled for them more intentionally, exhausting the local waters of smaller fish, degrading the fishery. Over the decades, a cycle developed. The more the fishery degraded, the harder it became to land the more expensive species everyone originally came for. The more the trawls relied on netting smaller fish for aquaculture. Eventually, there was a crash. Catch per unit plummeted, and with waters barren, the boats chugged on to do it all again, somewhere new. End footnote. Then there's disease. As with any group of animals raised in a concentrated, confined space, and especially one soaking in the broth of its own feces, shrimp in captivity became far more susceptible to disease. And when a pond spoils, it spoils all at once. One day you have several 100,000 healthy, wriggling post-larvals. The next day you pull up a net to find your shrimp listless and deformed. After that, all is rot. The entire pond is not just worthless, but toxic, a stew of dead and dying animals that need to be drained and shoveled wet into disposal. And then the disease spreads to your neighbor. A cycle of spectacular growth, overnight riches, and then sudden collapse came to define the Asian shrimp industry. It is a cycle that rolls across the globe, seeking out new, untouched territory, from Thailand onto Vietnam, onto Indonesia, then India, a movable gold rush of pink gold, where the promises remain the same and the failures come in new, innovative forms as the diseases continue to mutate. Jonathan Shepard, former head of the International Fish Meal and Fish Oil Organization, has estimated the collective toll as ranging up to $20 billion and calls shrimp aquaculture virtually uninsurable. It's an industry for gamblers, betting they can ride a region hard before some new ecological crash. But as any gambler knows, the house always wins. And for shrimp, the crash and boom are regional events, while the global story is one of growth, continuous output, and considerable wealth. And so, amid the individual ruin, an industry arose. Those pre-processors, brokers, exporters, fish meal factories, and trash fish boats, all forming a beating economic heart, didn't care where the aquaculture farmers were located or what ecological havoc had been wrung, but did have new, much-needed jobs to offer, and did need the blood of able-bodied men and women to run. An able-bodied man. I first meet Tun Lin sitting on the side of a barbecue in a cement alleyway in exurban Thailand. It's well over 90 degrees in the evening, and the mosquitoes hang big and fat in the air, lethargic from hours of blood-sucking. I have come as a guest of a local NGO called the Labor Protection Network, or LPN, which promises to show me around the area's shrimp production plants. We are all drinking warm beer with crushed ice out of highball glasses. A long picnic table is laid with all the fixings for a Thai feast: white tendon meat stacked in swatches, pats of lard, bowls of gray-yellow sprouts, and 3 giant stainless steel pots simmering away with red oils and coconut milk. Everyone mills and chatters in the way of NGO gatherings around the world. There's a man with a guitar and a group of interns gathered around him. Tun Lin is sitting by himself on the side, hunched and apart, not so much lost in thought as eyes darting and nervous. He looks lonely and non-threatening enough that I, who know nobody here, feel like I can drag my translator over and approach him. He's holding a baseball cap in one hand, and my first thought meeting him is that he's balled his fist so tight holding that cap it looks like there's no hand at all. I think this is a man so tightly wound he's erasing himself. It's only at the end of the night, when I go to say goodbye, that I realize the cap was resting gently on his knee, and rather than being balled up tight, he was missing his hand completely. It was torn off at sea. We meet again the next day, and then on and off again for the next 2 months. I learn Tun Lin isn't nervous so much as he's a blank man. He exudes a negative charisma. There are several other fishermen I hang around with that I might even say I'm friends with. We get along, drink, laugh. Not Tun Lin. He agrees to meet and tell his story. But despite the succession of lurid details, he is desensitized to the point of almost being boring at it. He is, however, patient, and I think that's why I'm drawn to him. I get the sense he neither wants to exaggerate nor escape his past. He corrects me too often. Mostly I spend my time with Tun Lin thinking how the questions I'm asking him are just illusions of understanding, figuring out the precise way a trawl net is hauled in, or how he felt the moment something unimaginable occurred just magnifies our differences. It invites me for a moment to feel like I might connect, and then reminds me how false that is. And I appreciate that failure. It feels like the most honest exchange we can have. He tells me he's from Wabi, a tiny village in the Mon state of Myanmar, just north of the capital, Molamine. His father is a soldier. His mother is a Morphe, which is alternately translated as shaman, fortune teller, or necromancer. He remembers his parents as reasonably happy. Life was not easy, but there was a minimum sort of stability his father's post provided. Then, in the late 1990s, the army calls his father to serve. There's no simple frame of reference for rural Myanmar at this time. It is feudal and corrupt, trapped in time without electricity, running water, or paved roads, yet bedecked with assault rifles. Tun Lin doesn't grow up with a floor, but he does remember his father's M16 leaning against the walls of their hut. Transportation to the front is largely on ox-drawn carts. The country at this time is in perpetual civil war, between the government and the communists, between small mercenary armies funded by industrialists and rival tribes, between ethnicities and religions in the different subregions, all of whom ally with each other and disband and realign to create chaos. When his father leaves, his mother runs off, leaving him with his older sister. They lose their house, and suddenly, at 14 years old, Tun Lin has almost nothing. After a week of homelessness, his older sister finds a small house outside the village, and she takes him in. The house is made entirely of bamboo, dried and woven, and when it rains, the water comes through the roof and fat slow drops. Or as he says, it's fit for people to sleep in, not to live. In the village, he becomes an outcast. When he stops going to school, people say he is stupid and illiterate. When things go missing, people call him a thief, an accusation he denies years later with an anger that's heartbreaking. A friend's mother tells him his mother was a prostitute and that he's a bastard. Then his father returns with an aunt who is also displaced by the war, and all of a sudden there are 4 people in his sister's tiny house. It is at this point, wet and cramped each night, that he begins to dream of working in a tie factory. The way he describes these dreams, they feel so universal, almost charmingly adolescent dreams of becoming the family's savior, and yet so agonizingly specific to Myanmar during its civil wars. In Mwabi at this time, there are simply no jobs outside the army. Most of the people Tun Lin knows collect wood from the forest, which they take to the state capital to sell as firewood. If they are lucky, they earn a few pennies. It is a community undone, starving to death. Tun Lin tells me he doesn't really know what a factory is, only that people work hard there and make good money. But he dreams of a factory every night. He thinks he can make money and bring it back to his family and buy them a real house. And so after weeks of 4 people living under a roof that had barely fit 2, Tun Lin decides he needs to make his dream real. He leaves without telling anyone, bringing 3 t-shirts, 3 pairs of pants, 1 blanket, and the shoes he is wearing. He doesn't have a proper bag, so he uses a plastic one.